Welcome to the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your dedicated parental alienation coach, here to guide and support families as they navigate the challenges of high conflict divorces and custody battles. On this podcast, we'll share insights, practical strategies, and hope for those on the journey toward healing and justice. Whether you're personally experiencing these challenges or just want to learn more about the complexities of parental alienation and custody disputes, you're in the right place. You are not alone. This is the Fractured Families podcast, where every voice matters and every story is heard. And if you find my conversation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us reach more families who need it. Thanks for joining the Fractured Family podcast. I'm your host, Charity. I have Nicole with me today. She is from Illinois, and she's going to tell us about her experience being alienated for 8 years now. I really asked Nicole to focus on the experience they've had with the guardian ad litems. I know a lot of us who are alienated struggle with that. So Nicole, thanks for joining and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start a little bit with what happened, how you recognized it was alienation, and what brought you to this point of 8 years of fighting.
I think really for us in this battle, it's been alienation from the very beginning, from birth. So there's so many instances leading up to, the last 15 years, as the child's 15 now. I mean, falsification of birth certificates to remove the father, false molestation charges over and over. But really, more frequently now is just the phone must be on speaker. There's false labor board reports. Everything at my house is bad. My water is bad. All of these things that we're telling the kid, false order of protection on me that gets dropped. All of these things that create this worry within us as parents, and then you can see it in the child when they don't want to speak to you, they don't want to come over, they hate you, but they don't really know why. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, fourth court battle that we're in, we had to file contempt because we hadn't seen the child in almost 5 months because she just refused to come over. However, the other parents on the other side isn't encouraging that, isn't coming to pick up and drop off and things like that. So it really kind of leads to what choices do you have but to file a contempt petition to see if that relieves some of that stress within the household so that you can have contact with the child, that sneaking her out the back door after games and putting her in the car and not letting us have access to her, really builds that tension within the relationship, but the child doesn't understand why they don't want to come over anymore.
So tell us a little bit about how this started. So it's been going on for 8 years.
Well, it's almost very different. Things are a little bit easier and you don't necessarily notice the signs. I think the first time I started to think things were a little different was, you don't know how to do my laundry. I smell bad. This isn't clean. And then it's, I won't speak to you at events when both parents are there. I will only speak to the other side of the family. And then you start to really go, what is that about? What's going on when you have, grandparents and other family members at these events, but the child will not speak to you, won't acknowledge you, won't look at you. And it really, you take a step back and go, but why? That's not the relationship we have in private, because in private, things are okay until that other parent calls. And then you see the tension and you have to run off and take the phone call. Or if you don't answer, it becomes a nervous energy. So it's kind of like the start of how some of that became noticeable for me. I came into her life when she was 8 years old. And this is my husband's daughter, and they have been separated since she was 6 months old. So this has gone on the majority of her lifetime. And like I said, when I met her, she was 8. So, 8 years old, they're still pretty fun. They're still pretty outgoing, and you can kind of build that relationship with them. But when you start to notice some of those smaller signs is when you start to think, I don't always see other kids in this same situation act this way. So it really starts that process for you.
So tell us a little bit about exactly what's happening. So what do those dynamics look like in the household? Let's talk a little bit about that so we can better understand what it looks like and how we got here.
In my household, it is just my husband and the 15-year-old with us. My children are both grown and out of the house. So it's pretty easy because there's nobody else to worry about but the one, which I think would be great because I'm not an only child. And for a lot of years, things were really great. The child was coming to me for everything, and we had this relationship. We were doing things together, trips out, shopping. And, my husband was like, well, gosh, I don't really even matter anymore because you guys have bonded so well. Um, and slowly but surely, things kind of start to take a turn, and, small things become large things. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's always these small little things that add up to what's really going on. For example, I went to pick the child up one time after I have done it a multitude of times and had been around for 5.5 years at this point. And it's, you can't get out of the car and go. And the other parent takes off with the child and leaves when it's supposed to legally be pick up and drop off time for our parenting time to start. And the ball starts rolling then. It's, I'm going to tell the child to record you. And then the lies start coming of, I'm afraid of that other person. They're mean to me. They're treating me different. I'm afraid they're going to hit me, when there's no backing for these things.
Right.
And so that's really when the turning point happened within our household, is the small things of, everything is bad here. You're scared of that person. That person's doing this. Your dad doesn't love you. Look, this person's not here for this. But ultimately, keeping them from feeling like it's okay to go with that other person starts to create that doubt in their mind. And of course, they're going to think that it's bad over here, because why would my other parent tell me something that's
Right.
not, that's a lie?
Hmm. Yep. It started after she came into your life. Things were okay. You two bonded. Everything was great. Her and her dad had a great relationship. Did anything change on the other parent's side that could have impacted this?
Not that I know of. There have been things that were going on prior to me coming into the picture. There were, when the child was born, there was falsification of the birth certificate to remove dad from the birth certificate. There was 4 different counties of molestation charges, and things like that. And things kind of quieted down as I think that parent realizes these government agencies are watching me, and they kind of want to fly under the radar. They push it just enough to where they know they can get away with it, and they stop. But when somebody else walks into the child's life and maybe they've taken to that person, if you aren't confident with yourself, I almost think it creates a jealousy within that other parent that my child could have a relationship with somebody else besides me. And it takes a village to raise kids. We all know that. We all need our parents, aunts, uncles, whatever. But it was almost like from that moment, when, because I was the first person that he dated. So it wasn't like when we got together, there had been a multitude of people. But I think that uncomfortability of a child having a relationship with somebody else, for some people, can create that jealousy. And if you hate the other parent more than you love your own child, you're going to do whatever you want to make that other person miserable.
So, what is the parenting time that you two have with her? How does that look like in the household?
It's been very hard over the last, I would say, year and a half. We're trying to get back to normal as we're still, fighting in court. And we have recently had some great times. We're very easygoing. Dinner, TV, obviously when you're a teenager, you want to do things with your friends, but it is very strange because you are on edge and you don't know what to say or how to react or what to do sometimes when you have visitation time. And we have her 50% of the time, and we always have. So that really makes it hard because you almost feel like if you're not pleasing the child and the other parent, you're going to have the ramifications come to you as, you didn't do what I wanted and I have the control. Um, but it's hard because, based off of some of the behaviors, that if they're happy and everything's okay, then you feel like they're going to go home and it's not going to be okay for them when they get back to transition to the other house.
So, when did you realize it was parental alienation? At what point did you realize you guys were being alienated from her?
I think the more I Googled things
Yeah.
and saw stuff, I feel like your phone is a stalker and it knows kind of what you're looking at. And I would Google stuff because I thought some behaviors were weird. And I would be like, why is this happening? Or what does this mean? And, I would see things on social media and I'm like, yeah, that really is what's happening. And it's not like, oh, maybe that person was upset in that one moment in time. But when it becomes consistent behavior is when I was like, oh my God, that's totally what this is. And our attorney had brought up something about Gardner's 7 points of
Yeah.
parental alienation, which is actually a legal term if people don't know. And when I looked at that, I thought every single thing in these bullet
Yeah.
points is exactly what's going on. And it just was like, you start to Google and you're like, oh, because I think people think that's not real. That doesn't go on. It doesn't affect
Right.
people. And it
Yeah.
does.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about parental alienation. A lot of controversy about, I think, more so the word parental alienation than the actual actions. So I like to really focus on the behaviors. So those manifestations from the children are there for a reason because that's what has been noted throughout these years forever. And not only the manifestations of the children, but the behaviors of that alienating parent as well. So there's a
Mhm.
17 alienating behaviors from that parent. When you marry those two together, you start to recognize that whether you say it's parental alienation, psychological child abuse, resist and refuse, whatever it's called, it's traumatic for the child. And they're used as a pawn, to your point, to hurt that other parent. So you started to recognize it. Your lawyer mentioned it. Let's talk a little bit about the legal aspect of it and the guardian ad litems and what role they played.
The farther we get into this, the more, and I don't know how it is state by state, you realize that our legal system and our guardian ad litem just aren't equipped to understand, or they're immature, or they don't care.
Mhm.
Um, we have spent a very large amount on guardian ad litem, and we all like to throw out the term narcissism, but the narcissist looks really great in a really small snapshot of time. So when
Yeah.
they have to present themselves in an hour meeting with a guardian ad litem, they look great. And I was just doing everything I could. And what was I supposed to do? And if I do this, that's child abuse, but they're so scared. And ultimately, when we come in with a stack of things and we say, here's black and white evidence of, the other parent wouldn't even let the child attend our own wedding because we were in court. And if we dropped our court case, we child could come. Those guardian ad litems don't want to do their due diligence and investigate because sometimes those cases seem trivial and there's other cases that are going on. So then it becomes how the alienated parent is the parent in the wrong, and you need to go to counseling and everybody needs to do these things, and you can't discipline the child because that other parent has painted such an awful picture of you in a small snapshot of time, and you've come in emotional, upset, thinking
Of
that
course.
this person is going to care about what's best for the child, but also hear you on what it's done to not only your relationship with your child, but within your own home. And when they don't see it, it can be disastrous, but it just is, they just don't want to do their follow up. And so that's kind of what we've seen with our guardian ad litem. And I myself have had multiple conversations with him, and I've been very upfront about, what I've seen and what it looks like. And it falls on deaf ears.
How does she interact with the guardian ad litem? Your daughter, what is her relationship like and what is her perspective of that?
It's so funny. And this is another thing within the parental alienation is we don't get to see the reaction. They obviously, the child understands what he is and what his role is. The child has readily admitted that she has told stories that are not true,
Yeah.
and all to cover up for the other parent. But when you ask questions about things like that, or you try to get an understanding of how do you feel about guardian ad litem? Do you feel like it's going well? Shut down. Nothing. You get nothing out of the child. And it's just, there's so much in there. It's like a vault. So you can't even get the answer of, hey, do you like that person? Or how did you feel about that meeting? Or are you okay with going today? Nothing.
So she won't even break those boundaries for fear of consequences from the other parent.
Yes, yes. And most of the time, from my understanding of what we've seen within discovery of our case, the majority of the contact of if there was an issue at our home isn't even coming from the child, it's coming directly from the other parent. So if knowing that the child's old enough to communicate and has that direct line of communication with the guardian ad litem, then guardian ad litem should be talking to the child. But for some reason, the other parent is doing all the communicating.
That's not a concern. They don't.
No, nope, nope. Because that parent is doing everything that they can because that parent's painting themselves in this light of, I've just done everything. And, even falsifying documents and travel documents and contempt and things that are just really silly things that you should file contempt on. But all of those things that you continue to do are all just okay because that parent's done everything that they can.
What is that parent's ultimate goal? I mean, what is it? What do they want?
I think in this case, and I think in most cases, it's to erase the other parent from the child's life. It's, I'm going to make you miserable, and I know the point that hurts you the most is to destroy your relationship with your child after all this time. I'm going to
And
hold that child over your head to control you, but if you don't have that child, I know it hurts you.
yeah, so whatever they can do to make him suffer
Mhm.
through her, then that's totally okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
And how have you seen it impact her? I've read so much scientific literature on the long-term consequences. What have you two seen?
I've definitely seen a change in her. I think it's created some inconsistencies in her ability to maintain friendships and relationships. It's made her view of the world very skewed. And when these kids have this small bubble, when there's some differences between people, ultimately it's, you just have to shut that person out and they don't mean anything. It almost can come off as a sense of entitlement within people because I don't have to deal with you. You just basically, that person doesn't agree with me. So I'm moving on and I'm done with that person is what it teaches kids, is that you don't have to work on a friendship or relationship, and it hurts them in school, in sporting events. They see that and they model that behavior, and then they don't understand why they don't have friends, or they're having some issues.
How about academics? How does she do academically?
She is an awesome student, thankfully, very smart, so that has not been affected, thankfully. She got some smarts, so.
It's really interesting. I asked that question because there's a fallacy that if the child academically is performing, then they're perfectly fine, right? But this
And
is,
that's what guardian ad litem says.
yes, there you go. So this is a perfect example of just because they perform or even overperform in other areas of their life does not mean that they're not subjected to this psychological abuse and that there is not consequences of this behavior. They're just not projecting it in those areas.
That's a fair statement. It's, and the more you get into it, you don't want to sit there and talk bad about your kids to guardian ad litem because then they're negative. But you're like, okay, just because this one area is great doesn't mean that there's not something else going on within everything else.
Yeah. So how has her dad been dealing with it? I mean, it's been going on since she was born.
It's very hard, and you see it take a toll on your mental health,
Yeah.
your sleep schedule, everything. You read about narcissistic abuse victims and how things affect, their brain, their weight, their mental health, their sleep, their work. I mean, my husband is always at work, he has a very demanding job, but it does affect you because you're always thinking, what's next? What's the next thing that I have to think of? And that takes away from everything else that's going on within your home and your visitation time with your own kid.
Yeah.
It's been very taxing on him and his entire family. Everybody has to worry about, well, what are the possibilities of what's going to happen next? What is that person going to make up next or
Yeah.
accuse somebody of? And it's sad that the court system is like, that's just okay to put people through that. Not only the adults, but the child.
Yeah. They're the puppet of the
A
show.
100%. Hmm.
And the courts don't recognize that. But the question I ask, and this is great that you're on because I usually have the birth parents, but one thing that's really under focused is the amount of stress, anxiety, and heartbreak it has on your role as the step parent. How does that affect you? How does that affect your marriage? And you've raised your kids, they're adults, and clearly that went well. What is that like for you?
It's very hard to watch. It's heartbreaking because some people have this belief that blood is thicker than water, and a step parent doesn't mean anything. I come from a family where I had a step parent on each side, and honestly, I think from time to time that they were more wonderful than my own parents. I wouldn't be the mother that I was, and I wouldn't have the understanding of things without those people in my life because they brought a different perspective into my life. And I I just couldn't imagine not having them. They are truly wonderful people. And I wasn't raised to treat them any differently, and they didn't treat me differently. So, when going into this, I treat my stepchild just like my own.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to have somebody act like you're doing something wrong when you're doing their child's laundry, making their food, doing their hair,
Yeah.
taking them to school events, picking them up from school. When you're doing those parental functions, granted, I may not be their biological parent,
Yeah.
I'm still in a parental role from time to time. And when I do have that child, I
Right.
am responsible for them,
Of course.
um, regardless. So to watch that kind of deteriorate, and we've gotten to the point where the other side is now asking that I can't even be alone with her for 30 minutes. I can't pick her up and drive her anywhere. And honestly, there's no backing. I don't have a criminal background. I
Yeah.
don't do drugs. I'm not an alcoholic, which certain things I would understand. But for you to demand those things when I have taken your child and loved them, it, it's heartbreaking because you're trying to build a friendship with that person, and once they become an adult it becomes a lot harder because they become more busy and they're not around as much. So it's been very hard
Yeah.
because there's just no, at the end of the day there's no reason for it.
Other than, like you said, to cause heartache and pain and
Yeah.
create devastation. And like the thing is, so you're the step parent, you've been in this her life for 7 years. So if she erases you, is his role to be single forever? Like, is that the expectation?
I
And
think that was the expectation.
it's so unstable. It's just tragic.
It is. But I think some of that alienation piece comes along with that double standard of do as I say, not as I do, because the other parent can date and have numerous other partners around. There's one right now, and that person is okay to travel with, go on vacation, be around the other children that partner has. And so why are you teaching your child that it's only okay on that side? Because we're not saying ugly things about that person. And that's great. If that other person is great to the child, no problem at all. But it's that double standard in that alienating case, and which goes along with that narcissism, that only what I do is okay.
Mhm.
Everything else is not.
And does she see that? Does I mean, it's sad that she's a victim in this, but does she recognize that as she's starting to get older?
I don't think we're there yet. I
Mhm.
think there's glimmer of it from time to time. We are in a lot of counseling, and we do go often, and questions will be asked like, well, why do I get punished for things that my mom does, or my mom told me to do this? And
Mhm.
I think that sometimes the wheels turn, but then when you start to get a little bit of something, it's pulled right back in. So, it's almost like when you have those transition days and you know that the kid's with the other parent for 5 days or whatever. And I always said when my kids were little, I get them back and I have to beat that behavior out of
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
to get them back. It's almost like you're starting all over again every single time. So it's like when you think you get somewhere and maybe there's a glimmer, it goes right back.
So it's like retraining. It's like
Yes.
reminding them how much you love them, reminding them. And there's household rules, right? And that's the thing with alienation is they make it, well, they have rules on their house. Yeah, of course we do. Parents enforce rules onto children. That's how they become amazing human beings. But they use that as, well, you're going to follow the rules of that household. That's not even your mother. Why would you follow her rules? Well, because they're household rules. Even in our case, it was always a challenge. I don't have to listen to you. You have to listen to the household rules the same way everyone else in the household does.
And that's the problem is it could be something as simple as unloading the dishwasher, or
Yeah.
you had a bad attitude, and maybe your phone, for example, your phone got taken for an hour.
Mhm.
Well, the police show up at my doorstep every time that there's a no or something that doesn't
Yeah.
got told no to an activity. The
Hmm.
police show up. I have several police officers here that know me by my first name because they come to my house so much and they know that there's nothing wrong. But when you do that and you call the police for a phone being taken away for punishment
Hmm.
for having a bad attitude, all you're doing is reiterating that everything over at that house is wrong and you have no say. You can't tell me what to do. That other parent's going to call the police on you and you're going to get punished. That's not right.
And the courts think that's okay. It's okay that 14, 13, 15-year-old calls the cops because you take their phone away or you
No,
set.
the other parent does it. And that's just it, is I think you get bogged down by so many things that are happening within a high conflict case where it's this has happened. And I'll be honest, it's every single time we have the child that there's something going on. So it becomes so much evidence that it's almost like I don't, not that they don't want to do their job, but I don't have time to look into all of
Yeah.
that. And I think things become lost
Yeah.
in the shuffle, and it's your job to speak up and say something, but I think sometimes there's just not enough time.
So what's happening next? Where are you guys at in the court case?
We are in the middle of a 604B, which isn't a custody evaluator. So we
Mhm.
are having psychiatric evaluations. The child is included in that.
Mhm.
And so this is really kind of a hope of ours that this person will shed some light on it and see, based off of the testing and yet again the evidence that we will give him, as far as here's what's happened. Seems like a pretty even keeled person, is really looking for those pattern of behaviors that can ultimately be proved. So I'm really hoping, and so is my husband, that at the end of the day, we can just get somebody to recognize that there is manipulation, that there is visitation interference, that there is constantly something going on. And at the end of the day, I think we all just want peace in our life and the
Yeah.
ability to have our kid and do those normal family things. So we are about 30% done with the evaluations. He has come to both homes and evaluated all of that, and so we're moving forward with everything. So the hope is that by summer, I hope we can be done with that and maybe see some kind of justice within this so that we're not losing more time with the child.
So what is his ask and your ask from the courts for your outcomes? What is it that you're looking for?
Ultimately, we just want things to go back to the way that they were. We have a temporary order right now, which does keep her from being with me if he's at work. However, we had years of that not being the case. There's no reason to create more back and forth for the child, and that was the ask of the other parent, is because there is so much back and forth. We are creating it by making the child go back and forth based off of all these things when
Yeah.
they have their own room, clothes,
Mhm.
toiletries, everything over
Mhm.
here. They live here 50% of the time as well. They're not sleeping on the couch. So ultimately we just want things to go back to the way they were, to a schedule that works. And if there's a day that needs to be worked upon, that's fine. But when you're dealing with somebody high conflict, it makes it a lot harder to work those things out and do something in the appropriate time frame that seems fair.
And does she want to be there 50% of the time when she's not in fear of actually expressing what she wants? When she feels safe, does she say, I want to be here, I like it here?
She doesn't say that to us. She has expressed to the counselor that she does not have issues with me, that she wants to do things and she wants it to go back to the way that it was. And, I want a relationship with my dad. And those are hard things to hear because it breaks your heart,
Yeah.
because that they're only saying that in a very um, safe space,
Yeah.
and they should be able to just be okay no matter what. So
Hmm.
that's hard. And when we didn't have her for a while, she was reaching out to other family members at Christmas time, like, what, am I just not invited? What's going on? And so to me, those are cries for help, because if you
Yeah.
didn't want to be involved, you wouldn't be reaching out to everybody. And so that leads me to believe that they do want to be involved and they do want to be around, but how can I express that without coming out and being direct to the person that I'm supposed to be
Yeah.
making happy or being on their side?
Are afraid of. I mean,
Correct. Yes.
the reality is these children, if they're living in a household where that parent is narcissistic or borderline personality, antisocial personality, they live in fear. That's the reality. Just like, say this all the time, if you're an adult and you're in a high conflict relationship that's incredibly toxic with one of those personality types, you as an adult live in fear. How is a child who doesn't have the coping mechanisms that adults have, how are they supposed to manage those emotions? They're not capable of that.
Not at all. Not at all. But if you watch closely, you can see some of those behavior, even in young children, just based off of the things they say, like, I can't let that parent down, or I can't do this. And it's sad because, again, you hate that other person more than you're ever going to love your child.
And they don't put that child as a priority, and they're not realizing the amount of psychological harm they're inflicting on that child to not be able to say, I love my parent. I love my dad. I love my stepmom. That's okay. There's the more love a child can have, the better.
100%.
So, what is the relationship like with your adult children and her?
There basically is none. My
Mhm.
children are my children, and we won't go down the road of the nasty things that get said about them from the other side. And it's not bad, but there's about a 10-year age gap in between my
Yeah.
oldest and her. So it's probably a little weird, when somebody who's 25 is around. But my youngest, when he was around more, would give her a ride to, her activity or things like that. But you can tell that she's very introverted in those relationships. They're boys, she's a
Yeah.
girl.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just don't want to do that, but there was no reason that it couldn't have been ultimately better than what it should be,
Right.
because it should be good. There have been a couple of times where my oldest has gone out to dinner and told some stories about, his childhood, because my kids did come from domestic violence. And so to kind of correlate that for her, I think was good, because of course you're living in the world of false allegations, so we're abusive. And so
Mhm.
I think hearing it from an adult, but not a parental figure
Right.
adult,
Yeah.
helped with some things, but we're working on it for sure.
Yeah. Wow. So you have done great work. I mean, wow, to stick by your husband. I know what that feels like. It's incredibly daunting and emotionally challenging for sure to to watch him go through that and to watch her go through that. It's got to be ripping your heart out.
It does. And I think our court system may cater to women, but in this day, I don't care if it's the mom or the dad doing it. Like, if somebody ultimately is stepping up and being the parent, we've never missed parenting time. So why should we punish dads
Mhm.
for wanting to be there? There are plenty of dads that don't, and there are plenty of moms that don't. I think we need to stop looking at it from that perspective and really looking at what's best for the child. Is it
Yeah.
just best to take children away from the other parent or only give them 2 days a month? I don't think that's healthy. I
No.
don't think it's healthy at all. But I feel like those are the threats of, if you don't do this guardian ad litem, when you have them in these cases, is ultimately going to be the one making the recommendation, because they're the one closest to you personally. And a judge is going to look at what they're saying and take it for face value, regardless of their understanding of what parental alienation is or what's truly going on, when you're not following up and asking the questions.
So has your guardian ad litem given you any insight to the fact or position they take on the word parental alienation? Because that's another hot topic. They don't like it in certain cases, in many
He
cases.
he has not, and when you come in and you make accusations like that, it's almost like you're ripping on the other parent.
Yeah.
Well, what other way can I come to you and say, here are these things that have happened,
Yeah.
this is what I feel like it is, because you think that ultimately this is a person that you can trust and they're going to do their due diligence and interview the child, parents, grandparents, all those things. I know that they have to take seminars and things like that around parental alienation. So I'm not sure why some of them are so closed-minded to that topic, but they don't want to hear about it. And that's basically the person that we have, is they don't want to hear about it. And everything that person does is okay, but we're authoritative if we take something away or, have a boundary or a rule for the child.
It's so
It's
infuriating.
it's very odd. If you really got down to knowing it, I was like, how does this work?
Well, any last thoughts for other parents going through it? Stepmom, stepdad, siblings, family members?
You are not alone. It's real and it's awful, and you're never going to understand it or probably ever have the answer. And I think the best thing that we can do for ourselves is find somebody to talk to, find that support, whether it's in person, social media. Make sure you're sleeping, because you're going to feel like you're going crazy, but it it's real. And when you tell people your story sometimes and you really get in depth with it, people are going to look at you like you're crazy because they don't understand. But there are people that do understand.
Great. Nicole, thank you for joining the Fractured Families podcast. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fractured Families podcast. I hope our conversation has provided you with support, understanding, and actionable insights to help you navigate your own family challenges. Remember, healing is a journey, and reaching out for help is a sign of strength. You're not alone. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more families in need. You can contact me on social media at Parental Alienation is Real, and visit our website for additional resources and ways to get involved. Stay strong, stay connected, and keep fighting for the family bonds that matter most. Until next time, take care and stay resilient.